Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first week of the Social Entrepreneurship for Innovations in Health course. It's made possible through the Making More Health partnership between Boehringer Ingelheim and Ashoka. We are so glad that you're able to join us today. I'm sure you'll agree that it's been a bit of a crazy year given everything that's going on right now with COVID-19. And I know that some of you are on the front lines of trying to find ways to keep us all safe and healthy. And we're so grateful for all the research and the work that's being done in healthcare systems across the world. So although we're physically distant from one another, let's make an extra special effort to connect with each other over the course platform and see if we can't envision together what a new normal might look like for you as a social entrepreneur. As you go through the material for the various modules, I want to encourage you to make note of things that really jump out at you or any questions that you might have. And of course, keep asking your fellow learners about what they're reading and what they're thinking, because that's one of the biggest benefits of being part of this community. And in case you didn't know this already, you will also earn extra points for watching this webinar live. And this applies to every other webinar on the course. So while it's on, you'll see a survey question at the bottom of the page asking if you're watching it live. So go ahead and click yes and submit. If you don't see that survey during the session, try refreshing your page and I'm sure it'll come up. So this week we've kicked off with module 1, which is the business case for social entrepreneurship. And here to set the stage and walk us through this topic today is Maggie Dupree. She's the co-founder and global director of the League of Intrapreneurs, which is a global learning community for corporate entrepreneurs. She spent over a decade harnessing the innovation potential of business to address issues ranging from climate change to healthcare, and has worked with companies such as GSK, BMW, Nike, Barclays, Shell, BP, and SC Johnson. She regularly speaks and writes on the topic of sustainable innovation and entrepreneurship. And together with John Elkington, she is the co-author of The Social Entrepreneur, a field guide for corporate change makers, which is a fantastic resource for all and for everyone really who's interested in entrepreneurship. So Maggie, it's such an honor to have you with us today. Welcome to the course.
Thanks, Sharon. It's great to be here, and hello, everybody out there.
Great. So would you start us off today by sharing maybe just some of your professional journey as an entrepreneur and a supporter of entrepreneurs?
Sure, Sharon. Well, yeah, my journey to entrepreneurship really came as I was looking about how change is going to come about. And I've always been really attracted to the entrepreneurial folks that just don't take no for an answer. So there are so many of those in the Ashoka network. You know, your fellows are these incredible examples of people that just see a problem out there, you know, whether that's now COVID or racism. And we have these big, meaty problems that I think for so many of us, you know, you just feel like you want to put your head in the sand. It's too big, right? Where do I even start? And what I've always, I guess the people that I've always been attracted to are the ones that found some place to start, said, I can make a difference. And so I spent the first kind of bulk of my career, about 8 to 10 years, working with entrepreneurs and startups, particularly in the clean tech space, looking at, you know, how do we shift those markets to be low carbon. So lots of entrepreneurial energy required. But what's interesting is through that work and through kind of subsequent work, I realized that it's not just about the entrepreneurs, right? We need our existing institutions as well. We need government to set policy frameworks. So if you take, you know, healthcare as an example, there's a lot that's not working right now in government, right? So we need government to be an active player in creating these solutions at a systems level. We also need businesses. You know, we need the existing businesses. I think in some sectors you're going to see, you know, maybe businesses like the incumbent businesses get disrupted and go out of business. But for most sectors, you're going to have these existing players that need to transform and play a role in bringing whatever the resources they have, whether it's their brand or their technology, particularly in healthcare, right? You think of all the R&D, all the talent that sits inside our existing health systems. You know, we don't want those organizations to go away, but we really want them to have more of an impact. So I guess my journey came into this really looking at how are we going to solve some of our big challenges like climate change and access to health, and really bringing that entrepreneurial energy to bear, that like, I'm not going to take no for an answer. And so through my journey, starting to work with these bigger companies, I started finding the entrepreneurs on the inside. And that's when it kind of struck me that these were very similar kind of, these people had similar DNA, I would say, to the social entrepreneurs that Ashoka works with, but they sat inside some of our biggest, most influential, most powerful organizations on the planet. And so that was kind of my starting point for the work I've now been doing for the last 8 years or almost 10 years, I guess now with Intrapreneurs.
Great. Maggie, we can really feel the passion and the energy that you have for this, this sector. So I think you're really the right person to start to speak with us on this course today. So I just wanted to find out, one thing you mentioned was about government, and we will definitely come to that later. I know we have some of our participants who have questions about how does this work in the policy space, and what kind of support is there from governments, but don't answer that yet. But I wanted to know from you, you regard the intrapreneurs as entrepreneurs on the inside, which I love. That's such a great definition. But can you tell us why social entrepreneurship specifically? What does it mean to you, and what's the difference with entrepreneurship? Because it's something that many of us still get mixed up about.
Well, I think absolutely. And Sharon, I think the best way to illustrate, as I've found over the decade I've been talking about intrapreneurship, and people, you always have to say it is spelled with an I. I didn't mistype that. It's not a typo. And still, if you type it in your Word document, autocorrect, that people ask about, like, what are your KPIs, and your metrics of success for the league? And I say it's when autocorrect stops, changing my intrapreneur to entrepreneur. So we are talking about people on the inside, right? So these are not people setting up their own independent businesses or organizations or nonprofits. There are people that work, basically you have a boss, you work for somebody else, you work for an organization that has its own objectives, it has its own strategy, and you have to think like, I'm creating this new innovation, solution, system, solution, product, service, and how do I connect it with the priorities of my organization? So that, I would say, is the key distinction of an intrapreneur from an entrepreneur. But I think it's best illustrated in telling stories. So if you're happy, I would love to just share a couple stories of intrapreneurs. I think it really lands for people, and also to show the diversity of journeys. Because what I found is there isn't one background or part of the organization or even type of organization. As you mentioned, governments, nonprofits equally have intrapreneurs playing roles, as well as in the private sector. So the first story I'd love to share is one of the very first intrapreneurs I met, and I thought of stories all related to healthcare, and also you can see even within health, there's very diverse journeys and examples. So first intrapreneur I met a very long time ago now, probably in 2006, a guy named Sam McCracken. So Sam is a Native American. So he's from the Sioux tribe in Montana, a state in the US. And Sam, at the time he kickstarted his entrepreneurial journey, was working for Nike. So you will have, seen the swoosh on the side of your shoes or what have you. So here's like the most powerful sports brand in the world, clearly an influential institution. And Sam was working in a warehouse. So he was stocking product, in a warehouse in Beaverton, Oregon. In Sam's community, the Sioux tribe in Montana, they at the time were experiencing epidemic levels of obesity. And as a result, diabetes, so like high levels of diabetes, and of course, complications from that can lead to all sorts of health issues, including death. And very sadly, Sam's mom passed away from complications from type 2 diabetes. So this was a very personal issue for him. He was seeing members of his family and his community dying, and he was sitting here inside this massive organization that had all this power and influence to reach consumers with messaging and information and even products to get active. And he said, hey, there's a role I can play here. I got to do something. And I think that's the thing with entrepreneurship. It just starts with doing something, and even when I interviewed Sam for the first time, he said, I didn't have a grand plan. I didn't write this like massive business case or this big PowerPoint. I just felt I needed to do something. And so for him, where he sat in a warehouse, he thought, well, I could get some free product. I bet I could get some product to donate to my community, and we can organize walks and runs and just start getting people active. So that was where it started for him, super simple. And then he started, working with the tribal chiefs to organize these activities. But then what entrepreneurs do, and Sam's case is an illustration of this, is they start talking about their story internally. And it's so infectious. You think, oh, I want to help this guy. So then he started talking to people that were in product development. And they said, oh, well, let's design a shoe. Like, we're a shoemaker. Like, let's come up with a shoe that might be suitable to the community, get people active. And so that was really the journey that started for Sam about, 15 years ago now. And he went from being, a guy in a warehouse. He's now the general manager of an entire product line called N7. And all the profits from these products that are sold go into funding physical activity for Native American and Aboriginal youth. So it's this massive fund. They've given millions away to Indigenous kids to get them active. So it was this very small step that he took, back in the day, and it's created this massive impact in terms of health on these communities. So I've got a couple more stories, we can maybe weave them in, but that's one example of an entrepreneur's journey. And just, I think sometimes when we, hear these stories, we see the people at the end, and it can feel often like, oh, that's unattainable. That feels so big. That person feels like this hero. Like, could I ever do that? And I think to remember these people just started with the first step, right? And a question and a problem that they felt they could contribute to solving.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very interesting. And I love that, that journey is not necessarily linear, right? I think for many people, they think there's a straight line that I can follow and this will work out. But can you tell us maybe some of the obstacles and some of the challenges and resistance that either you've encountered or that other people that you know of have come across trying to bring something different within the organization?
Yeah, it's interesting because we work in the league across sectors, across geographies, across cultures. And the thing we found is that the journey is very similar, that there's very common patterns to the resistance that you might face as an entrepreneur. And so, we've looked at it as like, there's an individual level to this, right? So there's, like, do I feel confident to step out and offer a new idea, right? So we might work in a context where actually, new ideas might not be welcome. Or people might say, well, that's the innovation team. That's not your job. You sit in it. So people like to put us in silos, and we see this kind of structural barriers in terms of and these mindset barriers where well, where does innovation sit in the organization? And I think that's changing. I think some more organizations are more open to say, hey, actually ideas can come from anywhere. But often it's like, well, that's not your job. Why would you come to me with that idea? Or often just doors feel closed. Right? It's like, just focus on your day job and stop spending time on that other thing. I think also we see, and I think the healthcare sector is interesting because it's one of the few sectors I feel it does take a longer term view, right? When you're developing a vaccine, you are taking a 20-year view often, or a new drug development. So there is a bit more of a mentality in the healthcare sector around the long term. But we definitely see with any innovation, and then social innovation on top of it, is that short term pressure to show results is a real killer for innovation. So if you've got this systems changing idea, how do you show progress in the short term? And I think also there's a lot about the business that we're in, in that frame. So Nike, coming back to that example, Sam would have faced the pushback that's well, we're not a healthcare company, right? We sell shoes. So why are how do we kind of reframe the business that we're in, right? So maybe it's not we make shoes, we're in the business of making, getting people active. Right. And in healthcare, it might be, oh, well, we make drugs. It's okay, well, maybe you need to frame that into we create healthy communities. And I know many organizations have been doing this, but I think it's that framing of what business we're in. And I remember, one story when I was talking to Nick Hughes, who some of your watchers may know, he was the entrepreneur behind M-Pesa. And that's, a very famous kind of entrepreneurial project within Vodafone. It was a mobile money platform that's now kind of scaled up within Africa and around the world. But at the time when Nick went to sell that into the organization, he received this feedback and pushback really that was, well, we're a mobile phone company. We sell airtime and phones. That's how we make our money. We're not a bank. We're not in the business of financial services. So that frame because they didn't have the frame that, oh, we could be a platform for access to healthcare, for access to finance. So that's really like a big job of the entrepreneur, is kind of shifting that frame, and that can be very difficult work to do. So I'd say that is a very significant barrier that entrepreneurs face.
So you mentioned the fact that firstly, there's a group of entrepreneurs across the world who are all facing similar challenges. So I just want to talk about the League of Entrepreneurs, who will come back to what you're saying about, making the actual business case, the business case to the higher ups. But I just want to find out how has your work with the League of Entrepreneurs been helpful to some of these individuals? And is that something that our participants can also take advantage of?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Sharon. I mean, so I've been working with entrepreneurs for, gosh, over 10 years now. And when we did the original research, we went and we were talking to entrepreneurs about, what are your dreams? What are the innovations you're developing? And what are the challenges that you're facing? What we heard over and over again from people sitting even inside organizations that we would see on the outside is very progressive, maybe had made significant commitments to the sustainable development agenda. The change work on the ground is still really challenging because of the reasons I've just mentioned. This kind of natural reaction to say, well, that's not our job, or we're not in that business, or what, like that'll never work, or that's been tried before and it failed. There's just, most people, I don't know, that it's just something in them that it's easier to dismiss a new idea than to embrace it. And so these entrepreneurs, they just kept saying, one, thank you for giving me language to talk about my work. Because before, people didn't know where to put me, and you don't want to be put in a box necessarily, but you want people to value what you're bringing to the table. And I think what we've done with Intrapreneurship, and are still doing, is showing the value that these types of employees that you on this call today are bringing to the organization, right? You're showing up in a different way, and rather than like having to excuse that, or like to put yourself in a box, you say, no, I'm proud of what I'm bringing. Actually, it's called intrapreneurship. It's a thing. And I'm adding value to organization, right? Like I'm thinking in systems, I'm bringing in new perspectives, I'm translating between these communities we're trying to serve and the language of business. I'm prototyping things. So you can start breaking it down and like, what are the actual skills that I'm bringing? But so to answer your question, the entrepreneur said, thank you for giving me language. And then who else is out there? And so this sense that I could connect with other entrepreneurs, be in community, be less alone. So when I go back into that meeting with my boss, I know I've got 300 entrepreneurs behind me that have got my back. Or I can go into a Zoom call like this in a safe space and say, you know what, I'm really struggling right now. Like I'm getting all this help me to navigate. And so then you've got entrepreneurs coming like happy, like telling their stories, listening to your pitch, so it's this incredible wellspring of support for entrepreneurs who are a different breed. I mean, let's be honest, and they can be kind of annoying sometimes. They don't take no for an answer. They're like the entrepreneurs, and so the League really provides that safe harbor for folks to come and feel supported, and then to learn. I mean, at the bottom line is we don't know how to do this. Like we don't know how to create a capitalist system that works for everybody, that's anti-racist and regenerative. Like we have not done that. So there's not a roadmap. So we use the term pathfinding to talk about work a lot, which is like how we're kind of holding hands through the fog, navigating. And so what are you seeing? What are you spotting? What are you learning? What have you tried? And creating space for that. So yes, we're a learning community of entrepreneurs, and we invite, anybody on this call that's interested to get in touch and join us.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I can imagine how lonely a journey it is. It's bad enough for entrepreneurs, and I think it's worse for intrapreneurs. And it's something that many people are still trying to figure out, like, who are you? What are you trying to do within the organization? So I think having that community, that network of like-minded people, I think is so valuable. And I think the work you're doing in that respect is very important. So we're going to be getting a few questions from our audience as we go. So I'll just throw them in here and there. The first one I'll bring in is from Alan, who says, in your experience, what is the biggest challenge for a company to accept an entrepreneurial project or to develop an entrepreneurial culture? I think that is an excellent question. Yeah.
The biggest challenge for companies to accept entrepreneurial projects, I think for most companies, it's seeing the strategic fit, right? So it's interesting because I talk to all different sides. I talk to the leaders in organizations and I talk to the entrepreneurs who are leaders in their own way. And the entrepreneurs will say, they just don't get it. Like, why won't they give me more money? Why won't they give me more time? Like they're very frustrated and they kind of see this, everybody talks about the clay layer and what have you. Then you talk to that layer and they're saying, well, I'm measured in this way. I've got these targets. If I don't meet these targets, I have to lay people off. So I think being really understanding of both sides, right? And I think the difficulty that management has is in, seeing these projects, is not maybe going to deliver, especially if you want disrupt. So, leaders say, we want disruptive innovation, we want the radical innovation. Well, that doesn't fit into your short-term quarterly return reporting. So you've got these processes and systems to kind of keep the existing business model going. And if you try to put an entrepreneurial project into that, it's just going to fail. You're going to kill it before it even, discovers anything. And so really looking at, how do I set up separate systems? And it's not to say you don't measure things, but you measure different things. What are we learning through that project? Like, what are we prototyping? What are, all of that, or skills development too. I mean, I think, we know most entrepreneurial ventures fail. Similarly with startups inside companies, a good majority of these are going to fail. But what have we learned? What skills have we developed? So really looking at, like, what are we trying to achieve with this project? And I think they do, it's the entrepreneur's job is to make that case, to make that connection, right? To say, look, you've said that these are markets we want to go into. Well, if you want to, and in healthcare, I mean, I worked on this project with GSK, they were talking about building trust. And they wanted to access, these new growing markets like China and India. And what the entrepreneurs in that company said, well, we're not going to be able to go into those markets in the same way. They don't have the same type of healthcare structures. They have, in the case of India, millions and millions of people that don't have access to basic healthcare. So if we want to come in and sell our drugs, we're going to have to address this issue as well. So it's a strategic thing for us, but it's pulling us into this new space that we don't know much about. So the entrepreneur's job is to make that case, the business case for investment. And then I guess the leader's job is to create space for experimentation and learning, and recognizing that project is not going to fit into the same kind of process and systems and metrics for everything, for business as usual.
Right. So it sounds to me like you're saying that the entrepreneur has to not just bring kind of the soft side of it and the kind of fluffy case that people make sometimes, but to actually speak the hard business language, which is understood by the higher ups, by people who are in finance and accounting and so on, such that they can actually get behind new projects and new ideas. I think that's a challenge for a lot of people, though, because if they haven't had that training, and that background, how do you bridge that gap? How do you connect with people who speak a completely different language, as it were, from what you're bringing to the table? Do you find people that can support you on the inside as well? Do you need sponsors, mentors, and those kind of things as well?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's such a great question. And so, finding people inside. And so when we studied different entrepreneurs and like with the Nike example, when I met Sam, I met about 20 entrepreneurs at the same time. And you listen to them and you could actually boil it or kind of draw a line back to one individual in that organization, this guy, Gary DeStefano. So there was kind of this one guy who was saying like, oh, I'll write you a check, or I'll give you a, half of a person, of FTE to help with that project, or, so definitely finding your fairy godparent, godmother, godfather within the organization. So there's people that can help you navigate and understand it. I mean, this is, when you ask the question about the difference between entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, like this is it. Right? You are in an organization that has its own priorities, its own decision-making processes and power structures. So as an entrepreneur, you really have to understand that. And the best way to do that, especially if you're maybe newer to an organization, is to go to people who have been there for a while, who understand like how do decisions get made. And I would say one thing we've learned is you cannot assume what's going to get people to say yes to your idea. that is a real learning. And so really mapping your stakeholders and then understanding like, what is it that's really motivating them? And I'll give you an example. I was working with a big oil company. We were working on a climate change initiative and the data didn't add up, right? Like we could not make the business case and we were struggling because it's like, you hear business case, you've got to come with your, spreadsheet and your NPV and all this stuff. And the consumer research said that actually like consumers didn't really see that like their petrol station or their gas station, whatever, didn't expect them to get involved in climate change. So we didn't have a lot of good data, but we had a hunch. We knew that if this company could take a leadership stance on climate, that it would make a difference. But our data didn't back it up. But still, the guy leading this project went to the CEO of the consumer-facing part of the business, and he got the support. And do you know why he got the support? Is because the CEO of the consumer-facing business is a human being who has grandchildren, who is thinking about his legacy because he was about to retire. So he took a punt and he said, I'm going to give you the funding for this project, even though the data, and we hear stories like that all the time. So I think there is definitely like, have your business case, do your research, get as much data, get as many case examples as you can to support it, like show people, try to de-risk it as much as you can. But then also appeal to the humanity of the people in your organization. Like, what do they care about? They want to be on the right side of history. Like, you can make it easier for them if you can give them data and examples and all of it. But at the end of the day, if you can find that one courageous or caring individual or manager, that can make all the difference. So I would say it's really this mix of kind of heart and head that you have to be playing with all the time as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's really excellent advice. I think there's so much to be said for the element of just storytelling as well, and just being able to tell your story in a way that it connects with people on that emotional level, right? Not just the head, but the heart, as you're rightfully saying.
Totally.
So I should just let you know at this point that we've actually hit a record for our course. We have over 150 people watching live, which is really, we've broken all records tonight. So I think you're doing a really good job. And we have still a lot of questions coming in from participants. One from Maria. She's asking, how can one weigh a social entrepreneur's impact in the context of a big corporation? For example, is an action that only affects 1% of the company's total turnover meaningful?
Oh, Maria, it's such a great question, right? It's like, how do we measure impact? And I ask myself at the league that all the time. And it is tricky. We've seen, I remember, an entrepreneur is working at Novartis, and, he had this incredible program that had scaled up, that was reaching millions of people in India with, educational information and access to healthcare. But compared to the core business, it still felt quite small, so what we've seen is different things. Like, you can think about like brand, so there's the dollars and the numbers, but then what else is it doing, right? Like, is it improving the brand and reputation? For healthcare companies, like reputation and like what do they call it, kind of license to operate is super valuable, right? So like my ability to go into especially I'm contracting with governments all the time. And if I can show that this work is improving, even if it's just 1% of my business, I'm doing good work that's having meaningful impact in communities, there are stakeholder groups that your organization is likely going to care about. The other thing we've seen, and I think this is something we need to talk more openly about, is sometimes it doesn't sit over the long term. Your solution might not sit happily within your organization, right? So it may have been a good place to incubate, but maybe it needs to spin out. Like maybe it needs more fuel and energy outside. And so we saw that with Reuters Market Light. So it was a Thomson Reuters entrepreneur that created this the solution to provide like weather and pricing data for smallholder farmers, via mobile phone. So it was this incredible tool incubated inside of Thomson Reuters, but then as it grew, it just kind of didn't sit well with the strategy of the organization. So they've spun it out and it's become a scaled up social enterprise, very successful. So I think it's interesting to think about, different ways of measuring impact. and telling that story, even if you're, technically small from a numbers standpoint, there are lots of other ways, and employee recruitment and retention is huge. That's a big case for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's like, I came to work for this company because of that project and that work you're doing. So it can be a real differentiator also for employees, employers, but also don't be afraid to think about, gosh, maybe there's another way. Maybe to grow, we need to spin out.
Right. So it definitely takes a lot of thinking outside the box, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Another question we have coming from Rafael, who is at BI in Argentina, is, in your experience, how can we gain skills to be a social entrepreneur? What resources are available out there? I know you have plenty up your sleeve.
Yeah, so we do have lots within the league. I mean, that's why we set up the league, is really to create a space where we're constantly learning. So we have, I can show you, and this is like free downloadable on our website, but we have this this compass tool, and this kind of takes you through the different components of what to think about. But I would say, Raphael, like the starting point, and because you're here, you've probably already done this, but what we've seen is there's this reflection on the why for you personally. So when we were talking to entrepreneurs all over the world to create this particular tool, the thing that stood out for us was the starting point was like a fire in the belly, right? Like there is something I am just really fired up to make change on in the world. So this isn't an intellectual exercise. This isn't just a market opportunity. This is something that really drives you. And like the story with Sam, it was very personal. And we hear that over and over again. And the reason I say that is because the journey is challenging. You will hit hurdles, you will hit low points. And so it's that fire in the belly and that kind of guiding North Star. Like, what's the question you're asking? Like, how might we bring, more healthcare to this community? How might we address, childhood obesity? How might we get this vaccine developed for these, for malaria or whatever it is? So what's that thing that's driving you, that fire in your belly that's very personal? And then start looking at the skills you need to kind of bring that idea to life. I guess, yeah. So I say the league has a lot of resources, and then it really look at the different kind of components of that. And so the guide, or with the compass, it kind of breaks it down and offers external resources. So I'd say that would be a starting point I would offer, is just go to our website, download the compass guide, and then for each of the sections, so be it storytelling or coming up with your idea, we do try to refer you out to other organizations. So like human-centered design and all the work that IDEO has done around that, that's an incredible resource. The lean startup tools are great resources. And then the kind of like psychological tools around like understanding your stakeholders and stakeholder mapping, like those tools are really helpful. And the final thing I would say is just practice. It's so interesting when I work with entrepreneurs, sitting inside these large, institutions like yours, like BI. And I just suggest, like, go talk to a customer, go talk to a member of the community you're trying to reach, go talk to a stakeholder, just go have a coffee. And there's this sense like, I can't leave my, big corporate institution and just go have a coffee, which is what an entrepreneur would do. So I think there's a little bit of just like think and act a little bit more like an entrepreneur rather than this big bureaucracy, and just to have a conversation. And yes, you'll may have some constraints around how you can do that in a way that is within the legal frameworks and stuff of your organization. But to the extent you can just like listen and learn and observe and hear, from the communities that you're trying to reach, like that is really at the heart of this. So try to kind of shake off a bit of the like, oh, we have to do all this formal research and we can't go talk to customers for the next year. It's like, get out there and start talking and listening. And those are the kind of muscles that you want to be building, is those entrepreneurial muscles. And I think the only way you can do that is just by doing it.
Absolutely. You brought up some really important points, and some of those we will be touching upon in the other modules. So Raphael, definitely keep going through the modules and through the material. You'll get.
Oh yes, of course. Your course is a great.
Just to supplement what you're saying, but it really just emphasizes things that you've already brought up today. So thank you for speaking about all of those things. So Raphael's question is actually linked to the next one from Catalina in Chile, who's a medical student. And we have actually quite a lot of medical students who are joining us on this course. this time around. So I think they'll be very interested in learning about what the league is doing as well. But her question is, what extra knowledge should we have to be able to be part of a social innovation project?
What extra knowledge? Well, first of all, congrats on going through the medical student journey. My dad's a retired physician, and actually we have some medical doctors within the league. So that's been really interesting to see like what that journey looks like. And I would say the advantage that you may have, what I've observed with the medical professionals in the league, is that the care and compassion is at the heart of this, right? There's an empathy that I have with a particular community, or I'm developing. Like I care about something like bigger than myself and bigger than my organization. So as a medical professional, like that's kind of baked into the DNA. So I would say you've got probably an advantage to the business school student who's like, has to kind of build care into the numbers. So perhaps maybe I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe that is the skill set, right? So it's like as a medical professional, as an aspiring doctor, like your strength will be in care and compassion. And so there is kind of a business mindset where you have to think about like, what is the case for this investment? If I'm going to get my organization to invest in my idea, how do I make that case, that business case? So maybe there's something to think about there in terms of understanding that. But the skills that you will be practicing and hopefully learning around listening to patients. I mean, so much about like identifying a challenge is about listening and observing and really kind of sensing like what's going on in the system. And so one of our entrepreneurs is a surgeon at Harvard Medical School in Boston, Geza Ortega, and his family's from the Dominican Republic, but he's here now in the US. And so he really looks at the healthcare system, and in his question, his kind of North Star and like the fire in the belly, right? It's like, how do I create a system where people are like feel represented here? When I go to see my surgeon, that I see somebody that looks like me, maybe somebody whose family's from the Dominican Republic. So that's been a big thing for him, is like, how do we build up, diversity in my field? So that's one thing. And then also with the existing practitioners, so the existing surgical and medical community, how do we create what he calls cultural dexterity, right? Mm-hmm. So I create a connection and an understanding with my patient from all different backgrounds, and understand that this patient is not just a shoulder or a knee, but is a whole person and has maybe issues just literally getting to the hospital. Maybe I don't have bus fare, I don't have childcare, so what he's been working on is training for their medical professionals around what he calls cultural dexterity. So I think honestly, you don't need like even a lot of business case making to do that. It's just really a passion for truly caring for and providing safe, accessible environments to all the patients that you're trying to serve.
It's so interesting that to me that you keep mentioning this element of listening, and a lot of the skills that are required to be a social entrepreneur are not your textbook kind of skills. It's just almost basic human functions: being sensitive, listening, having empathy, being observant. Finding a way to identify with other people's needs and problems. So I think it takes it down from the abstract level and makes it something that's very practical for anyone to be able to do.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to another question from Lawrence in Austria, who says, I noticed that during the corona pandemic, large corporations have become more open to enable employees to do engagements that contribute to society. Assuming the pandemic would be over, which is hopefully soon, how could this engagement be maintained? So how does one keep up that momentum for social innovation within the organization?
Lawrence, it's such a great question, and I'm glad you're observing that as well, because we've felt that, right? That there's just been such a tremendous need, and we've heard it from everything from car manufacturers where they were making ventilators to governments, or just like try anything, open the streets and like, all of this. And I think it's just helping people to remember. What I've found is people really respond to tangibility and case examples. So if we can help people to see what was possible and what we did, that I think is the best way to keep keep it going forward, and to see like, well, like how did it benefit us, right? Like we like were able to retain employees, or we got customers wanted to come buy from us. I mean, it's been interesting to see companies that are investing right now in COVID saying they're seeing a positive feedback from their customers. That's a business case. So I think, one, capture any of the business case data that you can right now, and then it's just telling those stories over and over again, reminding people. And I don't know that, I mean, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I think something that comes to me again is, I think in this moment, we are seeing more of our shared humanity, right? I'm doing this call from my living room. You might hear my child and dog in the background, and I've been on calls with CEOs in the same situation, right? Like there's been kind of a leveling in a way, where I think we are kind of a bit more aware that we're human beings at work. And so I think that's what we want to keep reminding people of. And if you can hold on to that, then it's like, what would care and compassion do in this situation? And try to kind of hold back that tendency to just make it about short-term quarterly returns, and to say, actually, we showed that we could be caring and compassionate in a pandemic. And, that felt good. It was the right thing to do. And it had business benefits. We aren't a charity. So if you're not a charity, there has to be a business benefit. I think just reminding people of what we did during the pandemic, telling those stories and just inviting them to stay human at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Very critical.
Yeah.
I just want to give a quick reminder before we carry on, Maggie, just to our participants, that those of you who are watching live, remember to click on the button at the bottom of the page and answer yes to the question to indicate that you're watching live, so that you can get your extra points for that. Okay, so as we carry on, Maggie, can you share with us any best practices and any business trends in social entrepreneurship that you've seen maybe in the past couple of years?
Sure. Well, I think the one trend that we're seeing is companies starting, a couple of things. I think what we're seeing is lots of companies have gotten into the pro bono space. So like GSK has their Pulse program where they put employees into NGOs for up to like 3 months. And what's been interesting about that pro bono space is, I would say that's fertile ground for entrepreneurs. So any of you here that maybe just like kind of starting the journey, that's a great opportunity to learn about an issue. Right. So if you don't have your North Star, if you're not super clear on exactly what it is, the change you want to bring about, like if you can find one of those volunteer programs, those pro bono programs in your organization, and get paired up with a social enterprise, maybe an Ashoka fellow, and spend some time learning, that is super valuable. And then what we've been seeing is like entrepreneurs coming out of that saying, wow, I just had no idea that access, to maternal health services was so bad in rural, Uganda, whatever, I'm going to do something about that sitting in my healthcare company, so literally these are these kind of seeds of the entrepreneurial journey. And then what we're seeing is companies increasingly saying, oh, I think actually my employees might have ideas about how to solve my challenge. So they've set targets for themselves around access to health or climate change or what have you. And they're, companies are now doing these broad scale employee competitions and inviting, people to submit ideas, which is great. I think what it says we value you and we value your ideas. And no matter where you sit, if you're Sam in, the warehouse, or you're, head of finance, that anybody can have a good idea. So I think that's really positive progress we're seeing. And then what we're seeing are these accelerator programs. So actually programs focused on, say you've got 500 ideas that came through your broad-based competition, seeing 20 people then go through a really in-depth, because to make this work, I think this is like really something we need to be super clear about. You're not going to get very far with this as your side of desk job. So you might be able to incubate something for a little, you might be able to prototype something. But at the end of the day, if you want this thing to go, you need to give it fuel and all of your attention. And so that's what I think is good about these accelerator programs, is it it gives you that, right? It says, okay, I'm going to set my day job over here for 6 months. So that's what Google does, is they kind of pluck you out. And they say, okay, we'll put you for 6 months in this accelerator, and that's all you're going to do. And you're going to get this full-time support. You're going to get the funding you need, to get to whatever that milestone is, whether it's a proof of concept, some successful prototype, or like a market number or whatever. So those intrapreneur accelerators, I think, are great. I know BI is doing this, and I think it's one of the few organizations that really is taking a holistic look at intrapreneurship, because at the end of the day, and I was just speaking to one of your colleagues, Sharon Arnaud, who runs Ashoka France, like, this is a culture shift. For us to put care, compassion, social impact at the heart of the organization is a shift. And so, how do we make that shift? It's not through an accelerator program, right? Accelerator programs are good for projects. Totally, they're really great. And I would suggest more companies do that. I would also invite companies to think really holistically about, what is the DNA of our organization, and how can we make it more caring and compassionate and entrepreneurial? And that starts at the top, right? It starts with the leaders, setting the agenda, setting the priorities, and then saying, okay, who are we hiring? Who are we retaining? How are we measuring them? So if I'm just measuring how many units of the drug somebody sold, I'm not then looking at, oh, well, did they learn something new? Did they try something? Did they bring me a new idea? Did they build a partnership? All of this stuff, like all the things that we're saying we want. But if I'm just measuring this, then the entrepreneurs, we find they do this anyways. Yeah. But what they say to us is that I'm putting my job on the line because this is the only thing I'm being measured against. So I think organizations like BI that are taking this holistic look, they're saying, look, we're going to put intrapreneurship and social impact in our values, our core objectives. And then we're going to look at the way we bring on board people, the way we retain people, the way we measure progress. We're going to create these spaces for entrepreneurship to thrive. And I'm sure they're still the beginning of their journey, so I wouldn't say they've probably figured it all out. But I would say that thinking much more holistically about this as more of a culture shift, and like, how do we build that new muscle memory? And the one kind of advice, I don't know that there will be many kind of managers and leaders here, but when leaders ask me, like, how do I do that? I spoke with this head of this like $1 billion division for a big ag company one time, and what he said really stuck with me. And he said, I just ask myself, am I creating space as a leader, or am I taking up space? Wow. Right. So to take up space, right? It's like I'm micromanaging, I'm dictating. It's all, But if I'm giving you space, if I'm trusting you, and I think right now, like with work from home and COVID, like I think there's a bit more space right now. I think that's also probably why we've seen more creativity, more innovation happening. It's like, I don't have somebody constantly on me all the time telling me how to do it, but I've got trust. I've got like a North Star of where we're trying to get to, but I have a little bit more freedom on how we get there. So I think as a leader, if you can ask yourself, am I creating space for my team, or am I taking up space? And is that the right balance? It's probably a good place to start.
That's such a great perspective about, am I taking up space, or am I giving space? And it's good that you mentioned that. And, you have companies like BI that are kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to creating that culture. But what about companies that are still kind of at the beginning of that journey, and perhaps they aren't as receptive to some ideas? It's a question that we keep getting on the platform about how do you deal with, especially middle management, even once you get, once that tone is set at the top, sometimes there isn't as much buy-in in the middle. And how do you then go about navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the journey of the intrapreneur. So often an intrapreneur, they don't have support from their direct line manager. We see that all the time. And so they are having to find somebody, else in another part of the organization. So this fairy godmother is super important. I do feel bad for the mid managers. They get so much blame. And so this is what I meant before, is I think, put yourself in their shoes. Right? They're not bad people, but they are working towards an incentive structure that's been set for them. And so I'm not saying they're all doing it right, but I am saying is try to really understand like what is motivating that person to make that decision as well. And like what's the space where I can align. So for example, we've heard that entrepreneurs, you might have this really radical vision, right? That it's like you want to transform the whole organization, So I'm in BMW and like we're not going to make cars anymore. We're going to be a mobility company and all of that. And I've met those people. But they don't start there, right? They start by saying, okay, like what's the small thing? What's the small vision? So it may be sometimes about how much you reveal to people. So that's definitely it. I think if somebody's trying to like just show, not just about a project, but to show that intrapreneurship is a good thing. One thing I've suggested and found is really effective is start to find your intrapreneurs in those stories, right? So I think the risk for any entrepreneurial venture, whether it's about the culture shift or the specific healthcare project, is that it stays too abstract. It's very easy to dismiss a PowerPoint. It's less easy to dismiss something that's working in the real world, right? So does your competitor have an intrapreneurship program? We've got BI, like they're doing it, right? So it's like if you work at a competitor, that sort of thing. So where can you point to either within your organization and say, look, here's an example of entrepreneurship and look at the value it's brought to our company. Here's another. You start collecting those stories and those are your proof points. So whether that's within your organization or outside.
Right. Maybe as just as we're starting to wind down, our time is running out, but maybe we can just shift quickly to the policy side of things in terms of those that are working in government, with government. How do they, navigate this whole social entrepreneurship minefield? Is it something that you're seeing taking off within governments, or is it still a very closed and tight space?
Well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of it, and especially with COVID right now. I mean, what we're hearing is that, certain bureaucratic barriers have just dropped because the governments are desperate for solutions to COVID. So I think it's back to the question that was asked earlier about like we've shown it's possible in this moment. Like, how do we keep that going? So I think that is the challenge. What we've heard from entrepreneurs working in the sector is that like their big challenge is the kind of every 4-year electoral cycle. Although that said, like in corporate world as well, like the average tenure of a CEO is 6 years. So I think there is something about the leadership change that is a real risk to any entrepreneurial venture. So whether you're sitting inside government or sitting inside an institution, if you're too aligned with the CEO or the mayor or who, the next person coming in, and we've seen it. I saw entire access to energy programs just get killed off when the new CEO came. So it was like, okay, what could that entrepreneur have done differently? And I think embedding it more into different bits of the organization almost. So it's like, you can't, what is it, a starfish, if you like cut off one of its limbs, it still, grows a limb elsewhere. It's like rather than a spider where it's really centralized. So I think there's something about thinking about, who is the sponsor of my project and how do I get it so embedded in the organization that the new leadership coming in really can't kill it off. And the other thing we've heard, so we have like a entrepreneur working on the US Census, is that like, I think sometimes the innovation, the entrepreneurship, the creativity, the space that feels very natural for us as entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs to occupy, it's very comfortable, can feel really far and uncomfortable for others. And so they kind of try to push it away. And so what this one woman is doing is to invite everybody in the organization to just practice a little bit of it. So not necessarily to set up the whole new venture and do the whole entrepreneurial journey, but just to invite them to be a bit more creative, a bit more playful, a bit more entrepreneurial in their thinking. And people love that, right? So that's, I thought was a really lovely idea, is it because it is challenging. The dominant culture inside, our government institutions is I mean, there's this like whole skit in the UK about the computer says no, right? So it's like, but at the end of the day, if we remember that these are human beings with creative potential, even if it's super deeply buried, and you can find ways to invite them to show up with that part of themselves, hopefully you'll get more progress. But I guess the last thing to say is it's very similar to the just any entrepreneur's journey. It's like, find your sponsors, your supporters, navigate the system, make the case, all of that still holds true.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of strategic thinking that's actually called for. To be an entrepreneur, you have to really think of all those different aspects. As you said, just spreading risk, for example, and saying, let me not house this in one department in our government. Let me spread it across. I mean, that's not something that many people would think of. So it calls for a lot of strategy. Maggie, you've given us so many great insights. We'd love to know from you, what keeps you motivated and inspired to do this work?
Well, I mean, it's the entrepreneurs, that's why I do the work, is I believe in them. I believe in you. I believe that it's possible to use our influential, powerful incumbent institutions as platforms for change. We've got the reason. I mean, this is the thing. We have the resources to make all the changes we want. We can provide healthcare to everybody. We have the money, we have the technology, right? But we have to have the will to do it. And what I see is entrepreneurs, like those of you on this call, like you are showing up with that will. And so why I do the work that I do every day is to help you realize those visions, make that dream a reality, because we can't afford not to, right? We can't afford not to. So that's what fires me up and gets me out of bed every day.
And we're so glad that you do. Maybe just a few last words of advice for our audience as we wind up today.
Well, I would say stay hopeful. I think sometimes it's hard in the work that we do to stay hopeful. And so I think find those stories of hope. Please do consider joining the league, or at least just coming to us to find other stories of hope, because they are out there. And I think, we don't often get those in the news. So I'd say stay hopeful. I mean, I've said it already, but just really go on that learning journey. What's that little nugget of a question you're sitting with, or what's that, community or issue you want to learn more about? And I would say just start learning, how can you get closer, and go on that learning journey. And then I would say do something, right? Just try something. That is something I've learned over my 20 years of working. It's just like, do it. And even if it's just like this, incredible, disaster failure doesn't work, that's actually when we learn the most. I mean, I've had loads of failures and learned so much from it. So I think that's what I would say is, stay hopeful and find what inspires you. Learn, just get closer to the issue and learn as much as you can about it, and really listen. Try to leave those assumptions behind and really listen to what's going on. Try something. And then, again, not to plug the league, but we do believe in communities. So whether that's the league, or, within BI, you're forming your own communities, or within your medical, institutions, find your other entrepreneurs. Don't do this on your own. It's too hard and you'll burn out. So find your community, find your people, and get that support so you can go make the change that you're trying to make.
Right. So many excellent takeaways, Maggie. And I think not just for this course and this module, but really, I think for the rest of this year. I mean, it's been a crazy year, as I mentioned, so just attacking it again and saying, look, let me stay hopeful and let me find something that I can try. Even if I fail, let me go out with a bang. So I think you really left us on such a high note. We really want to thank you and appreciate you for making the time to speak with us, and just leaving us with so many nuggets. Thank you so much.
Well, Sharon, thank you again for inviting me, and best of luck to all of you participating in this course. It's up to us. So we've seen there's nobody riding in on a white horse to save us. Each and every one of us can play even a small role in making the change. So that's the invitation, and just good luck and enjoy the rest of the course. Absolutely. As Alice Walker said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So I think that's exactly a great note to end on for today. For all of you watching,
Thank you for tuning in live, and I hope today's session has helped to lay the foundation of social entrepreneurship for you. We'll continue to build on this in the next few modules. Be sure to take time, as I've said before, to read through the week's course material so that you can get a better understanding of the topic. And remember, this is a safe space for learning, so let's practice empathy with one another as we discuss and continue to engage on the various course topics. So enjoy the rest of your week, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye.